Hello and welcome to the ATG podcast, and I'm very pleased to be talking today to Paolo Manghi, who is both the Chief Technical Officer of OpenAIRE, but also a researcher at the Italian National Research Council. So welcome, Paolo.
Thank you, Michael.
So Paolo, let's start with Pisa. It seems like you have a big association with Pisa. You studied at Pisa and you've worked in Pisa most of your adult life. What is it about Pisa?
Well, that's nothing very special to say. I'm from Parma originally, so from Emilia-Romagna, close to Bologna, for those who know Bologna better. Well, Parma is known for Parmesan cheese. But anyway, at that time, and that's a long time ago, the best places where to study computer science were Pisa. That was the excellence in Italy, and then Milan and Bologna. And I wanted to move to Pisa. So that's after my studies, I felt like I was probably into the right place and I would stay at the university. So I went for a PhD, and then I took a master, and I moved to Scotland for a couple of years. It's excellent, it was brilliant. It was St Andrews in Glasgow. Great experience, a lot of Scottish people. And then I came back, and that's where I moved from the university to CNR, Consiglio Nazionale della Ricerca, where there is less, let's say, focus on education, but more on science and technology transfer. And for my background, that was the right place, I think.
So what kind of computing did you study for your PhD?
So I have 2 degrees, in fact. One is in information science. At that time, that's the way they called it. Was the sort of evolution of engineering and math, right? So it was among the first to get computer science studies, and it was information science. And then I got another one in technologies, scientists in technologies. And then after that, I took a PhD, and the PhD was mainly on research on data and databases. Okay. And from there on, I moved to data infrastructures when I moved to CNR. CNR was really a pioneer in that field. We started with, we probably coined some of the terminologies like research infrastructures, virtual research environments, system of systems. And I was in a very strong group. And that's where I slowly, over time, built up my own group. And now I'm surrounded by great people, in fact.
So how do you divide your time between, you're both a researcher and working for OpenAIRE? Is that a 50-50 split or what?
I would say it's a 100-100 distribution. I managed to do it. It's a bit stressful, but I keep my feet in both shoes, basically, and I love it. Being the CTO, it still involves a lot of innovations and research, which is really good. Of course, you have this extra stuff, like the overhead of the administration and defining roadmaps, which is less of researchy, but at the same time, it's very similar. I mean, if you work in an institution like ours, where technology and science go together, you often have to do with service provision. You offer it to the university itself, to CNR, to the Europe, so it was a quite of a natural shift from one to another. So my distribution is 30-70. Okay, that's what. But in the end, it cannot be, right? So you know the way it is. I mean, I have my PhD students, I have my research group, and I built on it what we then realize in practice in the OpenAIRE.
You said that research infrastructure was quite a novelty when you started. So how did you get involved in research infrastructure, and when so little was known about it when you began?
I think it's always Europe's fault. The Commission in that shows, yes, a lot of vision. So they really ask scientists what is the future, what they have to do, and so on. So if you look at the scenario now where you have these horizontal e-infrastructures providing, let's say, resources for science in general, from network storage, scholarly communication services in the case of OpenAIRE, and computing, and so on. HPCs as well, and you build these vertical applications of the different research infrastructures. That vision started, I would say, 30 years ago. And here at CNR, we built probably one of the first platforms that is D4Science, is still operational, that was trying to provide the middleware necessary to combine all this horizontality to serve the verticality, right? So customization were possible, and economy of scale were possible at the bottom. That was the research they were conducting here, based on service computing in general, but then it became more than that. It was resource-oriented computing. And from there, many things started, including what we are doing today in OpenAIRE.
So OpenAIRE, you describe OpenAIRE as an infrastructure, but actually anyone who goes to the OpenAIRE website sees a proliferation of tools and services, any number. So how would you describe OpenAIRE as what is there a single unifying factor?
Yes. So OpenAIRE, it's we define ourselves as the open science scholarly communication infrastructure, in the sense that we want to deal with all the aspects. I mean, and it's not just technology, right? So it's about an ongoing discussion. So it's, first of all, it's a forum. So it's a place where the communities meet and discuss and find common solutions. And they steer also the services towards the solution that they demand most, right? So that's the added value in at the end of the day. So think first of all OpenAIRE as a place where organizations, ministry, policymakers in general can meet, okay, where they can establish policies, they can study policies, they can exchange ideas. So for example, we have this network of open science desks in all Europe. We have strong connections with Latin America, Canada, Australia, Japan, China, South Korea, Africa. So we are extending the network to discuss solutions at all levels: policy, legal, of course, rules and governance, and then technical solutions. And the technical solutions some are provided by us. So we have 16 services in the catalog at the moment. But if you take a look at it, I would say the 80% is operated by OpenAIRE. The rest is hosted. For example, Zenodo, Open Citations. The idea is that if you're part of this portfolio, you commit to align your technology, make them interoperable, become a sort of battery of services in support of science, okay? So there are many levels of discussion. OpenAIRE is organized as a no-profit, okay, and it's community governed, which means it's based on membership, and we have standing committees where several aspects are being discussed, from the legal to the technical. So if you're a member of OpenAIRE, you're eligible to be part of a technical committee where you can bring feedback, suggest solutions, also bring your own solutions. So the kind of work we do requires a lot of skills, of different skills, right, that cannot never be gathered under one institution. So we collect research input or algorithms or data or visions from many of our members. So what comes out is a sort of glue of different experiences going in the same direction. So that's the idea.
One of the fundamental components of OpenAIRE is what's been described as the scholarly knowledge graph, which is the OpenAIRE knowledge graph. So how did that come about?
Okay, that's a very long story, but the first project around OpenAIRE was in 2005, and again, it's Europe's fault. So wanted to come up with the mandates for open access, and they wanted to have a way to monitor if these were followed up. Okay, so in the beginning, they started with a group of organizations in Europe, including CNR, University of Athens, University of Warsaw, there was Bielefeld University. So people specialized in digital libraries. Why? Because they wanted to build tools to monitor if the scientists were following up this option. It was the special clause 39, if I well remember, in the project proposals. Okay, so at the beginning was a way to collect data and come up with statistics. We slowly built on top of that. It was a project called Driver. The Driver and JISC was also there. Driver, then Driver 2, and then it became OpenAIRE in 2009. And that's where we moved towards a much broader coverage. So we wanted to check on open data, we wanted to check on project connections, and we started slowly building yet another research infrastructure. And then we just followed up what the community wanted. So now we have a graph that spans across all possible sources, not just in Europe. It's worldwide, it's global. Some of them very specifically managed by research infrastructures in Europe or globally. So we collect data from data archives, databases, information about their resources in there. We are connected to several software initiatives. So we built a graph that goes well beyond the traditional sources of publications and peer-reviewed publications. That was a slow process. So if I want to go into the detail, but it was basically following up the demands of the community. So that's what it is today. So it's probably the broadest collection of metadata worldwide, because we include all sources trusted by scientists, which means used by scientists on a daily basis, right? So they use them, and spans across all possible source of products. So it's not just peer-reviewed publications, but it's much more.
So does it include just metadata or full text or both?
So the process works as follows. So we collect metadata. We collect metadata about sources, about research products, but also about projects, about organizations, about communities, so there are many sources from which we're collecting. So we're not using just ORCID and ROR, but we use, for example, local author directories, local organization directories, and we span across institutional repositories, catch-all repositories, thematic repositories of all sorts. So not just publications. Okay, so that's the main difference. Okay, then we also download, where possible, PDFs or publications. Why? Because, of course, in there we can find content that we can use to fix the graph, to enrich it, to make it better, and so on. So we have a whole infrastructure down there that downloads PDFs, applies AI, full text mining to enrich the deduplicated graph, because at the end of the day, you need to deduplicate this graph, okay? So downloading, of course, the PDFs is not an obvious thing to do, because you need authorization to do that. So we download what is declared as open access, and we have deals with publishers, with Elsevier, Wiley, Springer, Taylor and Francis, ACM, for example. So we're downloading from them, and we give them back everything that we collect. Everything we do is open, okay? So it's free to access from our collections. We are now around 70 million publications, and we keep on downloading thousands every day. It takes time, but yeah, that's the collections we are building.
Okay, so there's a new emphasis on collections of this kind with the rise of Gen AI and LLMs, with everyone paying more attention to corpora. So how does OpenAIRE compare? There are both commercial platforms, because Elsevier has collections of content, and there's also not-for-profit collections. So how does OpenAIRE compare with some of the other collections that are around? There's OpenAlex, there's Semantic Scholar, and many others.
So with Elsevier, of course, well, it's a completely different approach in the sense that we are free. So everything we do is CC0, basically. So you can download your stuff. You can. The business model is different. Okay, so ideally, I think platforms, infrastructures like ours should be publicly funded. Okay, that would be the ideal scenario. So is where it's a highway. So it's a highway, countries, public systems contribute to it, and nobody pays. Okay, that would be ideal. This is only partly true. So we are partly funded, and partly we ask for contributions. And so in the business model that we have, we ask for fees to some organizations or to companies, especially if they build services that then they sell in return. So it's a sort of agreement to make us survive, with, of course, fees that are not comparable to the ones of other funders, the other commercial, let's say, competitors. With respect to other graphs or knowledge graphs like Dimension and OpenAlex, I think the main difference is the focus. Then the devil is in the detail, of course, but the data is there. It's the same data. So we're just, in this case, we're a superset because we go beyond. But then, of course, the devil is in the detail. Okay, so there are things that make us different, and we can learn from each other a lot. And I think this is the whole point if we want to move to open data. Okay, there is no one solution fits all, and the consumers of the data should only be put in a position where they know exactly what's going on, right? So when they're bringing together the data, they should be transparently described where it comes, what it does, and understand the potential problems behind. This is the trade-off between toll-gated collections like Elsevier, where they have billions, of course, to serve quality, etc. And in fact, you can find such quality, and other solutions based on open data where quality can be achieved through tools and through a sort of virtuous cycle between those that are providing the original data and the tools itself. So, for example, in OpenAIRE, we're investing a lot in this process, okay? So that's another difference probably to others. So we give data and we involve those who are providing data in the original place in improving it, okay? So we want to be used as a tool to improve quality. The reason is simple, is because data should be persisted where it should be persisted. Repository, archives, data, not in graphs. Graphs are temporary. They can be for 50 years temporary, for 2 years temporary, but they should build on sources that are reliable in terms of content. And it should be the graph themselves that enrich those sources, right? And make them precious for those who will come, okay? So that's the idea, I think.
Who uses OpenAIRE?
Well, many, in different kinds of users. So, of course, you have researchers, because it's a place where you can find information about so many aspects of science that it's nice to build on it. Organizations like ministries or universities, RPOs, so research performing organizations in general, and that's for monitoring. So they want to know how they perform, for example. And they want to investigate on various aspects, fairness, open access versus not open access for data, software. So we have dashboards. We sell also these dashboards that are highly configurable to come up with sorts of indicators on open science, fairness, and citations, and APCs. And we have different kinds of indicators that give you different perceptions of how you're performing. And then also discovery, of course, because in many cases we sell gateways. We provide gateways to, again, countries. So it could be regional gateways. For example, we do it for the Netherlands, we do for Ireland, where you can inspect the production of your scientist, okay, based on the affiliation, for example, of an author or of a publication or a data set to a certain domain. Could be country, could be community, could be... and then we have super companies. So, for example, Elsevier uses our data. They use it for, I think, for their internal calculations on links to data, links to software. And one of the APIs they use most is the one of Scholar Explorer. Also, other publishers are using the data that we infer to enrich their own collections. That's it. So many, of different kinds, let's say.
One of the paradoxes of the whole scholarly environment is you mentioned researchers use OpenAIRE, but actually, I think if you talk to the typical researcher, they wouldn't have a clue about OpenAlex or OpenAIRE or any of these services. Isn't it strange that the scholarly world, the ultimate users of the scholarly world, are frequently sort of unaware of the infrastructure behind what they do?
You'd be surprised this is not the case. So really, we are mentioned in hundreds of papers, and OpenAlex as well. So people know that if they want to have access to this data, they can through open data collection, and things are really starting. You can see to change, right? So it's the real gap is still between the policymakers and the open data collection, and this is happening. Okay, so still policymakers want to use traditional collections like Web of Science and Scopus because they're super high quality, super highly curated. The problem they have is that the eye of the funders in general, is moving now into different kinds of domains which are not covered by these collections. So if you want, have you heard of Koara?
Yes, but explain it, because I'm sure our readers listeners will
Okay,
not.
Quora is an organization that comes on top of many other initiatives before, so it's a push from the very same community. You've heard of Planes, you've heard of open access movements, and so on. So Quora is actually pushing this to the extreme and saying we should not at all rely on indicators like impact factor and citations only. Each researcher, as well as the organizations behind, should be instead evaluated on a number of indicators, measuring all sorts of aspects of the life of a researcher. Data, software, but also contribution to the community, participation to workshops, participation to standardization processes, innovation. So all these indicators cannot come out of the peer-reviewed publications, right? So it's a very narrow view, the one you can tell from there. So that, of course, undermines the basic foundations of evaluation of science, right? So people, countries, again, and universities are looking elsewhere. The problem and the gap there is still this, I think it's a change of mindset, because you can find errors also in Scopus, right? You can find errors also in Web of Science. Of course, there will be less, probably. But you need to really, if we all switch to the same collection, so to the same errors, right? We can still measure ourselves, and we can fix those errors, and we can make it ours. And by ours, I mean of the scientific community, which is today is not the case. You rely on somebody else doing this work, and you pay a lot of money, which you can well invest probably in better science.
There are. It's very interesting. You're talking about the sort of a widening of the sort of, if you like, the sort of the measurables, because I don't know if you've noticed in the UK, there's just been at least a temporary halt to the REF exercise, which is moving beyond, just as you described, moving beyond the evaluation of research articles to include other factors. But there's quite a lot of uncertainty about what those other factors are. And how they should be measured, and it's interesting that that this uncertainty has been revealed because of the pause in the sort of in the determination of the REF process. And I suspect that there's probably quite a lot of uncertainty in other European countries as well. Do you think that's true?
Yeah, it is true. It is true. It is. I think it's a timely change because of the data that we have at the end. It's actually rather exciting because it's something that we can really build on a community, because that's the idea. So we should all converge to these solutions as a problem, a common problem, and to find common numbers, because that's the idea. There is another level, however, which I really care about, which is the community level. So there are indicators that can, in general, describe research. But then there are others that are very specific to a community, which should be respected, and that often come up from the data they deal with, the software they deal with, which go under completely different screening, right, when it's about research assessment. So the problem is, for example, I don't know, how you evaluate data in the life science, in omics, or in STEM, or in general. So what is data? That's a very different thing from community to community. So you took a look quickly at the post that I wrote, but there's a paper behind that actually brings a lot of examples that we find that pose question marks, big question marks. Is a protein resource data set? Is a sequence of DNA a data set? Shall I count citations for that? Is it eligible for evaluation of science? So these aspects are very different from science to science, right? Compared to, instead, the publications, which are very general purpose and can, in general, be dealt with in the same way. So these numbers may change also in that respect, and I think we should care about it. Okay, monitoring science is different from science to science.
There's a couple of points there. One is it looks like there's a role for libraries here, in that, as I'm sure you know, typically every institution has a repository, and alongside that repository, or one of the things that the repository gathers, is the very sort of information about the activities of the staff, and their promotion and so on, their other activities. So do you think that the next stage for OpenAIRE, or for aggregators of repositories, is to try and capture that kind of broader information from all the individual institutions that are collecting it?
Well, yes, we are already. So in OpenAIRE, we have thousands of data repositories. Normally, the process is that they should knock at our door. Okay, and we include them in the process. We also do it now, and it's a new thing, but very interesting one, from CRIS systems. You've heard of them, right? Okay. CRIS systems are actually key because they contain not just information about the products, but also the links to other stuff. Okay, so context, which is extremely interesting, especially projects, etc. Okay, these can all be part of how institutions are contributing to the constructions of these knowledge graphs. They can build them nationally, they can build them, so they can build them globally, European-wide, it doesn't matter. The problem is how they expose the data. So one of the main roles of OpenAIRE in the last 10 years has been really to align those repositories towards common ways to export the data. So thanks to the work that we've done, now we have thousands of repositories that are compatible to our guidelines. Okay, it comes as out of the box in many platforms like DSpace, ePrints, Dataverse. So when you install one of those, you are OpenAIRE compliant, which doesn't mean that you can be collected only by OpenAIRE, but by all aggregators that are willing to collect the data according to those formats. Okay, so that's again one of the side effects of the research infrastructure. Okay, so I think we are already doing it, and that's the idea. In my ideal world, we would have an aggregation at the national level, an aggregation at the community level, and an initiative like OpenAIRE that collects from aggregations. Well, the hierarchy is respected in terms of how the data is curated under the same SLAs, and the data is fed back to the original sources to fix it, like we do now centrally. This, unfortunately, is not yet the case. So in some cases, we have such aggregations. In some cases, we don't. So we have to go one by one to the individual repositories. Today, we are collecting from 150,000 different data sources, including journals. Okay, some of these are the result of collecting from an aggregator. Okay, so that's the principle. But I think that's the direction.
So it's very interesting. This is where you see a big difference between the United States and other countries. In that you mentioned national collections. Of course, there's no national repository in the US. And one of the other things that you notice in the sort of the landscape in the United States is often a very different concept of what should be collected. So you have little agreement sometimes. Your job must be even more difficult. Not only have you got many institutions, but many institutions with a different view of what they should be collecting.
Okay, that's of course part of the discussion in the community. What is a research product? What should be evaluated? There is something that is good for all, and that's what we should be aligning about, right? And that's every time the same question when you build an infrastructure. So what is the middle layer of the data model that we are building on? Then, of course, you're free to do what you want at the local level, okay? And in some cases, for example, with OpenAIRE, we decided what a research product is. We're discussing with the community, and we built on that. So we have publications, data, software, other stuff, and that's the idea. We have a definition, okay? Not going through that now, but often we have people coming up saying, can my data be in there? And we just tell them, no, I'm sorry, because it doesn't fit the definition of what a product is. For us, a product is something that goes on the scientist's CV as a result of science. So with an author, with an organization, a title, an abstract. So it's something that you would actually put on your CV, okay? So it cannot be, for example, the bone of a skeleton described in a local knowledge graph that is very useful to classify stuff, but it's not on its own something that is associated to a person or to an organization, okay? So they keep on asking, What is the exchange? And it's interesting, we have projects on that. We have a project, very nice one, that is called SciLake. And the SciLake is based on the ideas knowledge graph, scholarly knowledge graph. And a scholarly knowledge graph has a model that can vary from community to community. So you can find your own one. But then there is a notion that is broader, that includes, for example, research products, onto which others can map to, okay? So you can map onto it to bring in the subset of your knowledge graph that matches that common definition. And that's the way it should be in general. So knowledge graphs should be interchangeable for what they have in common, of course, and benefit from that, but be specific to serve local collections. So OpenAIRE is about monitoring science in general, okay? So it's a different thing.
One of the problems you describe, I think, very memorably in your the article you mentioned, is that, of course, like every aggregator, you're totally dependent on the sources that you draw on. And you stated, I think it was you that stated, for example, some problems with even persistent identifiers, which everyone agrees are recommended, like ORCID, have fundamental problems in that there are many incorrect ORCID entries or ORCID misused, and this sort of moves us into an area of research integrity. Does OpenAIRE have a role in that sort of in that space?
Yes, we do. It's again, as I mentioned, we want to improve the community, right? And ORCID is one of those sources with which we have worked. Okay, so we work with them, and we wrote a couple of articles. Trying to identify which are the problems in ORCID, which are mainly not in ORCID itself, but how ORCID is used. Okay, so that's how it's misused, in fact. So we identified misuses of ORCID. I know that ORCID is fighting every day these kind of scenarios. Okay, they have their very good policy, I think, broad enough and well balanced with respect to the requirements of the community. At the same time, they know that they have to fight this kind of misuses, okay? And they have to send them back when they're really malicious, and that's the classic of open infrastructures, or when they're misinterpreted, okay? So you cannot have an ORCID ID for a journal, but in some cases they do, for example. And it's the same for any sort of DOI or DOI agency or persistent identifier agency, because finding the right balance between being open, so be used by anybody, and be controlled and curated is really hard. Zenodo is a good experience. Is a good example. The 80% of Zenodo's team work is fighting malicious use for all sorts of reasons, SEO, traffic, because it's open. It's an open infrastructure, and it's as useful as it can be dangerous in many ways. Okay.
So do you find the challenges in your work sort of to what extent are they technical, and to what extent are they kind of, if you like, as community based, as in what you'd like is the community to change, because you're limited in what you can do with your technical capabilities?
Yes, in some cases it's just impossible, right? So it's if a user, as you see in many examples, uploads something that looks perfectly like an article, but it's not, and it does it through a source that is half trusted with no curation, but it's half trusted, meaning that half of it is especially trustable, right? There's not much that you can do with a machine, okay? Probably something may happen in the future with LLMs. Maybe we'll be able to do deeper into this kind of, let's say, it's malicious use or spam use or whatever identification. We do, in fact, in some cases, we are already experimenting with it. The problem is mainly computing resources and how expensive it is to invest on these technologies, okay? But we strongly believe that the problem should be captured in the beginning. So yes, OpenAIRE, of course, has a special role. We contact all these sources. We want to contact also the researchers, that's to come, to alert them that what they've done is half good or suspicious at least, and for example, will not be considered in some applications like monitoring of science because it's not reliable enough, okay? And this is not to exclude them, but to improve the overall the overall cycle, because you cannot. Again, open science is really subject to a lot of different users, malicious users. So look at Google Scholar. is easily cheatable, right? So you can easily add and increase the number of your citations in Google. Why? Because it's an open infrastructure. If you understand what's behind, well, Google is not open, it's Google Scholar, okay? But the way it captures information, it is. So it goes into open sources. All you have to do is to upload your stuff in there with the right citations, and you can cheat it. There's plenty of articles in Google itself that explain how to do that, okay? And of course, it's fine. You measure your citations using Google Scholar, okay? But it would be great to know where the citations are coming from, for example, okay? So this is what open infrastructures like ours are aiming to do.
So this is very interesting. The inclusion principles and what you mention for the role of OpenAIRE as a gatekeeper is what gets included and what doesn't. And the classic example of this recently is the argument between Web of Science and eLife, with Web of Science deciding sort of to go down the route of being very heavily curated and refusing to accept some of the content of eLife because it wasn't, in their opinion, correctly peer reviewed. So do you see OpenAIRE as having a role of that kind?
So we, long story short, OpenAIRE is the executive board, the members really believe in the open access approach. So the distinction between there is a distinction between publishing something and peer-reviewing something, okay? So first of all, we believe in publishing. So you should put your stuff open anywhere. Then peer review comes in a second stage, and it can be of several flavors. Can be the usual and standard peer reviewed we are used to, okay? It can be more. It can be automated in case of data. It can be several things, okay? We don't believe at all in a world where only peer-reviewed stuff is good, okay? Frankly, I'm a scientist and I know what peer review is. It's a lottery in many cases, and in some cases it's useless, really. So it's things go through without any sense. So we believe, of course, that is valuable to have it to improve your science. Okay, that's a different story, but not to put a gateway on top of it. Okay, so that's a different thing. So if given that, of course, OpenAIRE can play a role in connecting what has been published to what should be peer reviewed, connecting the peer reviews to what has been peer reviewed, and so on. So it's a place of connection. It's a place of observation. Okay, so that's the idea. We do in the sense that whenever we go around, I say this thing, and our members say this thing, that we believe in this decoupling. We actually made friends recently in a few projects with EpiScience, for example, episciences.org. It's a very nice platform from French colleagues, and that's exactly what they do. So they allow people to create journals, to create boards, and people to submit to the journal, starting from an open access platform, Zenodo, HAL in this case. So the original paper is already out there in the loose, right? And peer review is added on top as a sort of certification of more stuff.
There was but what about your inclusion criteria? The recent research integrity problem that has grown in recent years does not always seem to have extended to the world of repositories and aggregators. There was a recent very memorable article by a French researcher on the collection HAL, identifying that it was failing to pick up retracted articles, and so one of the problems, surely one of the problems you must face as an aggregator is that you're collecting unwittingly retracted articles without any knowledge.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's a problem for many. Right? That's of course a problem for many. So what we would like to do, because again, it's not easy to put your hands to an updated version of the withdrawn articles, okay, is to tag the articles as being withdrawn. So not to remove the articles. Again, our mission is to be an observatory. So we don't want to take decisions on behalf of somebody else who's going to use our data. Okay, so that's the idea. This is not in already. We had discussions with Article Watch and all these people that are working in that, and we're trying to understand how making use of it. Okay, it's not the most obvious thing, but yes, that's the way it should be, I think. So we should take these into account and expose them, not withdraw them from our collection because of that. In fact, we can learn from it, and that's something that should be in. It's been in the roadmap for a long time, and we will include it in a way that is explicit.
Mm-hmm. One thing that you seem to include is I understand that you track citations, or do you log citations in OpenAIRE?
Yes, we are probably have the most extended citation collection at the moment, because we're collecting from not only from the known sources, so Crossref, Open Citations, and all this stuff, because it's the usual stuff. We're also collecting from repositories, all the citations that are made available. We are also collecting publications to data and publication to software citations. Okay, so in that sense, it's more extensive, because we include citations from publications to data, because we have a high coverage of data. And finally, we're mining for citations. So we're also contributing to this collection. So we are giving citations to Open Citations, for example, for others to use. So they also collect from us. Okay. That, of course, it's really hard to measure in terms of fine-tuning of the coverage, because we may have a PDF that, for example, OpenAlex doesn't have, or Dimension doesn't have. Dimension is a different kind of guy, because they have agreements with Elsevier, with the publishers, and they have coverage of publications that our poor open access collections cannot put their hands on. So it's close-gated papers, of course, are not open, but Crossref has opened up the citations from those. So that covers a lot of ground, let's say. Okay.
Nonetheless, you have the great opportunity at OpenAIRE, but because, as you say, you're sort of you're not for profit and sort of committed to open science, to investigate or to cover those aspects which perhaps commercial collections wouldn't choose to. So, can you give me examples of what you do there?
So. Important aspects are, for example, we have citations to publications that have not been peer-reviewed. So you can also measure this kind of behavior. We have an idea of how, for example, researchers in a certain domain cite data and cite software, how frequently they do it. So how, let's say, open science oriented they are. We have ideas on the completeness of the metadata in several fields. So, for example, if and how ORCID is being used, or persistent identifiers in general are being used, which kind of persistent identifiers are being used. Okay, so you can inspect this domain from different perspectives. Most importantly, I think we have the links to the projects. Okay, so links to, so one thing that OpenAIRE does is to collect project information from funders. So detail the grants, okay, so, and we mine for the grants. And that's another very important thing, because you can, for such grants for the funders, measure the open science impact, the open access impact. You can measure collaboration, co-funding, co-relationships of that kind. This is why funders are using our data, for example, right, to inspect what is going on. It's really an observatory of how open science is being uptaken, and also how to measure the return of investment, because it's a lot of money invested in open science, and the big question mark is it worth it? Okay, measuring this kind of stuff is extremely relevant.
You mentioned multiple services within open science, a sort of but there was a recent example, a post in Scholarly Kitchen, which was looking at open access book metrics, and I found it surprising that there are at least 3 open access book metrics services. OpenAIRE has one. There's something called Operas, which I think is linked to OpenAIRE. Yep, and but there's also and the Open Access Book Usage Data Trust, and there's a book analytics dashboard as well as Counter. So it seems that there's a multiplicity in this one area of different tools, and who knows, maybe compatible, may not be, all providing similar results. Is that really the way the industry should be going?
Good question. I think the industry should go for open data in general and build tools that you can sell. Okay, so these are two different levels. I think open data should be the normal practice. The problem is who collects this data and if they want to make it open, because if this is their own core business, of course, they're not going to sell it. They're not going to open it. They're going to sell it. It's a sort of trade-off that some companies, some industries are trying to sort out. Even Elsevier, from what I know, has this problem, right? So they're trying to be open, but they cannot because it's part of the business. So but when new industries or new initiatives come up with this kind of ideas, I think they have to go for commons if they really want to be effective, because again, there is no one that can take over the whole thing. So from what I know, for book user statistics, there are many initiatives to build data spaces, for example, on top of that. So on how to share this data, how to price it eventually, which is very important, and share it all together. We had connections because we are collecting users' data, which is free in our case, okay? But again, there's a big infrastructure behind, which costs a lot. So who's going to pay for this, right? This is industries solve the problem. No profit organizations like ours are trying to, because we want this data to be open, but we don't want to sell it. So how can you do it? And again, it's a very hard problem to solve. And I think the policy makers, so the ministries, the funders, should be behind these kind of choices. They should fund the right ones. And by the right ones, I have no doubt, of course, because it's open data collections, and make sure, this is a key thing, that they can survive, so that there is a community behind. Look at what happened with Microsoft Academic Graph, right? It was good, they all used it, then Microsoft turned off the key, that's it. If you turn off the light, there's nothing that you can do. Why? Because there was no community, no sustainability from the community, no funds behind it that would sustain it beyond the experts at that time.
Doesn't I completely agree with what you say, but doesn't it isn't it alarming to read of recent developments in the United States, where an institute like the National Institute of Health, which you might think was completely sacrosanct and which would have funding preserved in eternity, suddenly finds itself with reduced funding? Isn't there the danger that at some point the European community might choose to reduce its spending on supporting OpenAIRE?
Yeah, this is always a big risk. It's not just OpenAIRE, it's for many things that Europe is doing, but it's a thing we're living on, right? So it's what if Europe starts not to invest in highways? Well, you get holes on the highways. So it doesn't mean that you have to outsource it to big companies and pay for it millions and millions that you would not have anyway if you have to stop your highways, right? So because that's the principle. We're talking about really a proportion of 100 to 0.1, okay, in terms of expense. In some fields, this is really nonsense. It is really nonsense, right? And we're here more because of the legacy that we have than of anything else. Europe, but also the US, have everything that it takes to bring up these services as a community, spend what is enough, and have it of extremely high quality, involving the community itself. And I think this is the direction we're all taking. We should make sure it works like that, though, that it is structured in a way that if Paolo is not here tomorrow, Laura will come up, always Italian, of course, will come up and make things work. So it should be an office. It should not be a company, by all means, in a way, right? So you see what I mean? So it should be run by the community. I think this is essential. Otherwise, we lose control. Because if Paolo goes mad, right, next day and sells it for 1 million euros rather than 100, it's a problem.
But I noticed that there has been a shift recently with OpenAIRE towards a more, I think you mentioned some commercial activities. So there are some revenue generating activities from OpenAIRE. So is the idea for OpenAIRE to be completely sustainable in that way?
I think it's always going to be a balance. What we would like to achieve is a scenario where public funders contribute for the good of the community, and they can, because they renounce to invest in other things that are more expensive, because that's the idea, but basically. And the same the countries will do. To cover the rest, of course, this contribution may come from our consumers. So if I have a big company using my data and making millions out of it, I think it's fair enough to ask for something like a contribution. Could be all sorts, right? Could be also computing resources. It could be skills. It could be cleaning data. It could be budget, anything, right? What we're interested in is to make it survive, not to make money out of it. So that's the final, let's say, aim and objective. We do for some of the things that we offer, for example, inferring sustainable development goals or fields of sciences based in technologies. We are inspecting with projects other stuff, for example, assistance, virtual assistants for some communities to investigate or produce surveys and produce hypotheses, for example, check if they make sense with respect to the current state of the art. This is what we do in projects. On the production system, instead, is more about inferring content or identifying spam. That's the other thing.
One of the things, one of the features of Gen AI is the use of LLMs, and I think you described Scopus, Web of Science, and so on as being opaque and closed. But LLMs are even more opaque and closed, and they almost certainly include some copyright content, but nobody knows because it's not stated where their sources are. So, is there? And yet, for AI to work well, I'm sure, as you know, it needs the maximum content to do its work. So is there a way to resolve this situation? Can OpenAIRE help in any way?
Well, we can. So we offer our content to companies who want to do and build these things. Our content is, let's say, classified in terms of how open it is. So you know which is the level of responsibility you're taking if you're bringing in information that is not open. For example, with the publishers, we have very clear agreements. So some of the publications, the PDFs they give us even today, is limited in what you can do with it. Okay, and that depends on case by case, of course, with the agreements with the publisher, and we respect that. And in some cases, instead, whatever is open, it's open. Then, as you said, it's really hard to identify in some cases what exactly a license from an object that you declare to be open can do. Okay, and that's the way it should be, because in some cases you're giving me something claiming it's open, but you don't tell me what to do. Okay, so in a way responsibility is shared. We just make sure it is explicitly removed. This has never been the case so far. Some exceptions, some scientists that didn't want to be in the collection, fine, we just blacklisted and that's it. And some that came back asking to be recorded because they realized it was a stupid thing to do.
Yeah. So finally, this has been a remarkable kind of overview of the whole sort of scholarly communications landscape. But if you could make just one recommendation for how to change the scholarly communication landscape, what would it be?
One is not enough. Okay, let's go for another hour. No, I think, well, first suggestion is read that paper, because at the end there's a long list of things that I believe are extremely important. But in the end is to make sure that the community is deeply involved in everything we do when we are talking about research assessment, building this kind of graphs. So everything that these graphs should do should go somehow and pay back the community, so improve what they're doing in terms of how they produce data, how they publish it, the metadata they produce, because we have to put the next ones in the condition of producing collections like ours that are exceptional, that are transparent, and that allow us to bring research assessment in our hands in the end, because this is what we really want to do.
That sounds very good. I look forward to seeing sort of what can be achieved in the sort of in the years to come. So thank you very much for your time, Paolo, and it's been great
Thank
to
you,
talk to
Michael,
you.
for your interest. It was really honor for me to be here. Okay,
Thanks.
thank you.